Next year will mark my 50th year in Vinyl Haven, and I'm still from away. Over the years, I feel it's been really important to use education, transparency, networking, and consensus building to meet the challenges of my community and the challenges of my passion, the lobster industry. I first came to Vinyl Haven in 1991 to teach remedial reading. I came from a community of over 100,000 in a suburb of Massachusetts to a community of 1,200 people 15 miles out to sea. I immediately fell in love with the community and with the people. I got on a number of boards, started Girl Scouts, wrote the first zoning ordinance for the town of Vinyl Haven with a group of people who really were concerned about waterfront access and how we would protect our industry. Vinyl Haven was a depressed community. The town in the late 70s had combined forces with DECD and also with EDA to build a processing facility to provide jobs for people in Vinyl Haven, as well as a place to land shrimp, herring, and scallops. They went out to try to find someone to run the facility. A group from Canada came down and worked for 6 months and left. Another initiative in the town itself started up, and they ran the facility for most of the 80s. It was through that effort that I started in the fish business. I was asked to be on the board of the processing facility, only 3 weeks later to become the general manager. I had no experience at all in the fish business, and so I reached out to the workers, many of whom had been working in some capacity in a variety of fish-related industry facilities for many, many years, to get an understanding of how processing facilities went, and then reached out to a lot of people within the industry. That started my networking. Through a number of efforts, we tried to keep the facility open, but it closed shortly within 3 years, and in the early 90s became vacant. The town was working with DECD as well as the economic development people in Augusta to try to attract a company that would come and run the facility. In 1991, Claw Island Foods, a venture capital company from Raleigh, North Carolina, came and started processing lobster. They were the first facility to be fully dedicated to lobster processing in the state. I signed on as office manager, then became general manager, and then in my spare time, I started dabbling into export sales, which I then ended up doing for the next 30 years. The same workforce that had worked for me in the prior initiative came to work for me again. We reached out to the Lobster Co-op. We reached out to other buying stations in the area looking for lobsters to be able to process locally. We, at one time, were the largest employer in the town. Our electric bill ran in the tens of thousands of dollars a month. We bought as many goods and services as we could from the island, and for the next 10 years, really carved out a presence in Vinyl Haven. It was not without its challenges. Vinyl Haven had grown from a pretty much self-contained community to more of a mobile community where we went from 3 trips on a ferry a day to 2 ferries with 6 trips a day. Obviously, if there was a balance between trying to get product off the island and get nitrogen onto the island. We had experienced, as many of the other facilities did, as the other businesses did in town, a workforce drain. Many of my workers who had been working since they were 16 finally retired. We started having to bring people onto the island to work. Lobstering became more lucrative, and it became increasingly more difficult to run a business 15 miles out to sea. In 2006, the facility closed down and the owner moved all the equipment to Portland. At that point, the town was faced with a building where they could not generate any income, and the building was torn down. In 2006, the Vinyl Haven Co-op ran into some difficulties and almost shut their doors. Again, I was asked to come in and try to rebuild their industry or their infrastructure, and also to reposition them in the market. Through the efforts of my neighbor and a very active board, we renegotiated loans, and today they are a $15 million business. So there's been a constant challenge along the way in terms of how we have developed industry in Vinyl Haven, how we have dealt with a number of infrastructure issues, and I am confident that now, with young people getting involved, a young board at the co-op, and with new technologies being implemented, we can be much more efficient and attract new business to the island. At the same time, we have started to look at alternative fisheries. We have developed a company in Vinyl Haven that is now doing aquaculture in conjunction with fishermen. 70% of the board is fishing related, and our plans are to expand that to mussels next year. So we're really trying to work with the town as well as the landowners and other fishermen to show that this is a viable option that can be taken by the industry. In closing, I would like to share with you a story about my challenge in the marketing area of lobster. In the late 90s and up to today, we have many people who come from all parts of the world to our island. And we try to show them what lobstering is all about. We take them and to processing facilities, we take them out on lobster boats, and we introduce them to lobstermen. I had brought 4 chefs and my distributor from South Korea. We had toured up and down the coast, and at the end of the tour, we were coming back into Ellsworth. I had fed them lobsters for over 5 days. And I asked my distributor, and which lobster restaurant would you like to eat at today? And he leaned over and he said, you know, Mrs. Emily, they'd like to go to McDonald's. Thus, my efforts to market lobster were sort of flat-footed at that point. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I live on St. John in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It's a small little island in the Caribbean chain. It's only 9 miles long. It's only 3 miles wide at the widest point. 60% of it is the Virgin Islands National Park, which is the draw. Our sole business model is tourism. I must be the only person here today that has no marine industry connection whatsoever. But the island has no airstrip, it has no marina, it has a ferry dock, it has a barge landing terminal, and it has anchorage. So that's the way you get on and off of St. John. But it's a lovely spot. I moved there in 1972 to work at the hotel on the island and was entranced. I loved it. But better than that, I met a really very attractive young lady. We got married, and since then, St. John has been our home, our community, and it's a wonderful spot. In the 70s and the 80s, storms, you didn't even talk about them. It was not a consideration. The last historical account of a hurricane impacting St. John was in 1938. So no worries, Mon. It just wasn't on the conversation. 1989, though, Hurricane Hugo hit, came through the territory. We had probably Category 1 damages. We were unprepared. The telephone poles, which deliver electricity, and the landline telephones, they all went down like picket fence. One goes, they all the way down. So we had 2.5 months of no power. Communications were longer coming back, but we were told that was a 100-year storm. It's been 50 years since the last one, so we punched our ticket and we're good for the next 50 years. So really no behavior changed. And then 6 years later, Hurricane Marilyn struck. Excuse me. Anyway, stronger storm. We were less prepared, if that was possible. And afterwards, again, the infrastructure was gone. Housing damage in the housing stock. It really was a time to step back and say this 100-year storm thing isn't working. So the federal government, in conjunction with the territorial government on the public side, stepped in. They stiffened the building codes. They put in emergency management agencies on each island. They put in protocols about pre-storm warnings, and they put in post-storm protocols. We actually received awards for mitigation for the steps that were taken at that point. On the private side, the Community Foundation, the Rescue Squad, various groups stepped up and said, we need to look at these hurricane shelters, we need to look at how they're stocked, and that was the start. They, through grant applications and private funding, actually grew, though, and they started stepping out into the underserved portions of our population. They went with senior programs, Meals on Wheels, Dial a Ride. They had medical prescription assistance, and then they went into the marginally housed parts of the population. So this was a humanitarian thing that grew, and it was wonderful. It was great to have it on island. But it became a critical database, if you will, if you want to consider that as collecting data. But that will a piece that is critical later on. Susan and I, my wife, are independent businesses. She's in retail, I'm in real estate, allowed us to start reaching out and participating on boards and various volunteer organizations and commissions. My passion, though, became the Gifft Hill School, which is the connection with Island Institute, and it's a wonderful little small school, 180 students, and PK through 12. On a small island, you just get really engaged. It's a wonderful way to give back and to have a day-to-day type of connection. So. Back to storms, 1995, Hurricane Marilyn. We go through 5 years, no storms, 10 years, no storms, 15 years. We're like, you're watching Sandy go by, you're watching Katrina go by, but if they don't come to you, by 20 years, that muscle memory is getting pretty soft. And we literally are kind of sitting back. Gifft Hill School, we had our storm protocol, we had our procedures. It was all in a book in plastic pages. It was on the shelf. It was right where, where we needed it to be. And Sure enough, though, in August of 2017, a little low-pressure system comes off the coast of Africa. Conditions are favorable for strengthening. All interest in the Eastern Caribbean should monitor development. Becomes a named tropical storm Irma. Becomes Hurricane Irma, becomes a major Hurricane Irma. That's Category 3 and above. And at this point, everybody starts really looking at it and saying, we need to get serious about this. And it slams into the lower Caribbean. Some of our neighboring islands were devastated, are still coming back. Turns and comes our way. So we put in, we pull the book off the shelf and Gifft Hill School, and we do our protocols. We had all of our faculty and staff hired. We had our pre-enrolled student population ready. Our first day of school was going to be September 5th. It's all in line. Bring it all down. Collapse the classrooms into the waterproof protections, put up the storm shuttering on the building. Everybody goes to their singular safe places and gets ready for what's going to be the worst storm we've ever seen. And excuse me if I stumbled here. So September 6th, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., we had sustained over 185-mile-an-hour winds. And gusts, tornadoes over 200. It was devastating. When we came out afterwards, it was a changed world. As Christine described, the color is gone. Trees are snapped, buildings are destroyed. 50, 60-foot catamarans, these are 20-ton vessels, were literally blown out of the water. It wasn't storm surge, it was the wind power that took them and would throw them 500 feet up a hillside. It was astounding impact. And so you come out, there's no connection with anywhere. We're on a small island, but we know that relief and aid is coming. And as it starts to come in, it's like space aliens. They say, take me to your leader. Well, that prior leadership that we had that had assembled that database, that was critical. Remember, those who have the least will lose the most in a crisis event, whether it's weather or earthquake or whatever it is. And that's where you can be most effective directing your aid and assistance to initially go out, because people don't always make the best decisions. They don't always go to the best shelter. They don't always present post-storm for the aid and assistance they need. You need to reach out, and that was a critical piece. Gifft Hill School, I was on the island. I was chair of the board, had been for 10 years at that point. The head of school was there, and one other board member was there. We had 7 board members up here in the States, but again, no cell phones, no landlines, no communication. We go to the school, look at the physical plant, and the damage was in the millions. So, but we determined we had enough that we thought we could run a program if it was possible. We had established a teacher-faculty tree that had to be a physical walk to your neighbor, report in, and we needed to know, do you have water, do you have food, are you safe and healthy, and then are you going to stay on island? Because there will be evacuation opportunities, but we heard back that there was enough faculty that was going to stay that we could put a program together. We knew that the public system was heavily compromised. That was the storm shelter building in Cruz Bay on island, and it was so heavily damaged it's since been condemned and will be torn down. So if you're going to have an education program, that's what we're going to do. We got in touch with enough of the board members. Some of the board members, as cell towers started to come back, to communicate that. They supported us. We said there's going to be no tuition. Our business model was philanthropy supported, but we counted on tuition. If we were going to honor those contracts, tuition was a critical part. Not possible. Economy was gone. There was going to be nothing but some relief funds circulating for months, and then maybe insurance dollars coming in for the rebuilds. But the board bought into it and said, go ahead. We planned our first day of school. 9 days into the program, though, we were having community meetings almost immediately after the storm. The leadership on island would take small pieces. They'd almost make it like silos and have a small internal morning meeting and then report out. And they would go to a larger community meeting that people walked to because you couldn't even drive until The roads got opened up. But this community input back and forth was critical. People had to hear about the health care. They had to hear about the food and the water and the gas and the diesel and were the supplies going to be there and that kind of thing. And it had to be two-way. That communication had to hear what we call the coconut telegraph, what you might call the rumor mill. It's wildfire. And believe me, that will be destructive to your recovery process. It will crumble and people will flee because the stories are just like hairs on fire, get me out of here. The community communication piece was critical. So we were announcing we were going to have our first day of school. Then they tell us, oh, by the way, there's another low pressure system. Oh, there's a tropical storm. Oh, there's a hurricane. There's a major hurricane called Maria that's coming. And we go like, no, you're kidding, in 2 Category 5 hurricanes inside of 2 weeks. NOAA had not seen that before. Maria was the first recorded storm to be 30 hours in excess of 185 mile an hour sustained winds. I mean, these were record-breaking natural events, natural disasters. So we collapse the first day of school, shutter up what we can. We go to our already stressed shelter home sites and get our family and our friends and our pets and everybody huddles together. And here comes Maria through the territory. The eye passed to the south of St. John. St. Croix took worse impacts, and sadly, Puerto Rico took the brunt right on the chin, as Christine described to you. It was a disaster for them. For St. John, we came out afterwards. It's kind of like more of the same. You got water in there, you got more things blowing around, but there wasn't a lot left to degrade. So we went back to work. We put our 3rd day of school together. We welcomed in 130 children. And I would point out that that vulnerable population, that information that was so critical, you have to have the children included in that too. Even if they're in a home setting and the home setting is good, those parents are going to be needed to help rebuild. They're going to be needed in the recovery, and that's only going to happen if they know their children are in a warm, nurturing, good space. And it was wonderful. It was peer group, it was education, it was counseling, it was crisis management for those teachers on a daily basis. It was wonderful to see them gather everybody in. Community meetings continued on, but they morphed. They then changed the smaller, higher level, started looking at how can we do this better. We've got a vision, a better, more resilient, and different program when we're coming out of this. Yes, we went back and we put all the same wooden telephone poles back in again. That was the 3rd time the whole system had been wrecked in our 40 plus years on island. So they put them all back in again, but they visioned. They said, okay, what do we want to do? Where do we want to be in a year and 2 years and 4 years? And I'm pleased to say that the visions are easier to move towards after an inflection point like a natural disaster. You can overcome political inertia. You can overcome financial constraints that maybe weren't there or that were there before. But you've got to have your mission and you've got to have your vision. And I'm pleased to say that St. John now are pulling the little wooden poles out, putting in these big carbon fiber composite poles that are like hunking and they're all guyed down, and that'll give us a stronger infrastructure. We're going to microgrids. They're backed up with generators. We'll no longer have the multi-month power outages. We are going towards a zero waste initiative. We are putting in composting. We're going with recycling. We are going to a better place in the future for the island. And I'm pleased to say Gift Hill School, the support that came in, we called it over the transom. We didn't know where they were coming from, but maybe some of you were there that sent checks in. It was wonderful. We were able to finish the year. We're still rebuilding. It's always a struggle for an independent school on an island, but it is coming together in a positive way. And so I would just say that in the event of an extreme weather event, earthquake, whatever it is, excuse me, whatever the impact may be, one, know your community, know who the most vulnerable is, and know where, if aid and resources come in, where can they be applied most effectively. Number 2 is communicate. immediately after the storm. Communicate with the truth and fight the rumors. And whether you live on an island or your community may become an island, it's critical because there will be influence, there will be hairs on fire kind of stories. And number 3 is to vision. Allow your leaders to look at, plan for, and take you to a better place in spite of these disasters that'll vaporize hundreds of millions of dollars in assets like that. Thank goodness, out of all of this, we had no direct loss of life from the storm. In contrast to Puerto Rico, we did not have anyone collapse buildings, flying debris, all of that sort of thing. We were blessed in that. But it took us from 1989 to 2017, 28 years to get to the point of being better prepared, being more resilient, and being ready for the future. So please, in your communities, don't be like St. John in the 70s and 80s and go, sort of thing. But that's my message for today. Thank you all very much.
So this past December, I went to a conference called COP25. Quick show of hands, is this something new that people are hearing of, or do people know what this is? So COP25 is the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change annual conference. It's been happening for 25 years, and College of the Atlantic sends a delegation every year, and I've been a part of that delegation for the past 2 years. And this year, I went to Spain, to Madrid, and came to realize that the COP is really sort of 2 different conferences. It's one conference which is about the negotiators, the people that come from all over the world to negotiate on behalf of their countries. And that world is very sort of sterile and unemotional. And then there's this other world of activists and students and people coming from all over the world to try and save what they love. And that world is so much more human and emotional and sort of realistic. And so I split my time between these 2 worlds at this past COP. And in the negotiating room where I sat as an observer for 2 weeks, I came to learn that, like I said, this world is very, very unemotional. I watched as negotiators blocked language on human rights. I watched as the United States blocked language that would help countries to bolster their climate ambition. And I watched as negotiators from the least developed countries and the countries and regions that are least responsible for the climate crisis be consistently silenced and not heard and not heard to what they should be. And in this other world of climate action, I felt much more empowered. In the negotiating room, I felt you feel kind of crazy. You're in this room and people are not talking about people. They're talking about power and the economy and how to keep business as usual and not recognizing that there are these systems that we have to change in order to address this crisis. And so halfway through the COP every year, there is a march. And last year in Poland, this march was pretty small. It was about 3,000 people. And it was a wonderful experience to be a part of, marching in the streets of Katowice, demanding climate justice and system change, but it was very small. And this year, I walked the streets of Madrid with 500,000 people, and this movement has grown so much within the past year, and that was such a tangible experience to see just how more motivated people are this year than last year. And I was walking in the streets with these people that are demanding system change and climate justice, and just feeling so inspired by the world and having these conversations with people like Christine and like Miles who have lived the climate crisis and have lived this experience and who know how to solve it and know which solutions work and which don't. And so as we ask ourselves, how do we solve this giant problem that is so freaking overwhelming? What sort of systems do we look to? Do we look to the inhuman, bureaucratic, slow systems of what we have in place, or do we look to these new systems of justice and people-centered approaches to addressing this crisis? And so when I came back to Bar Harbor, which is where I am currently as a student, I was trying to figure out how to bring these messages with me. And I've been working with students in Bar Harbor and at College of the Atlantic alongside our local town council to declare a climate emergency in Bar Harbor, and also to establish a climate emergency task force and figure out what the town can do to address the climate crisis on a very localized level. And so we tried to incorporate ways to make the process more equitable and inclusive, and find ways that wouldn't leave people behind and would keep us prepared. And that's something that we're still working on, and that's why I'm so glad to be here today and to have listened to our panel talk about how to have those hard conversations and how to include different sectors and different voices within these conversations to make sure that everyone is moving forward and benefiting and also being saved when we're talking about the climate crisis. And so going back to COP for a moment, I had a very powerful moment sitting in a room in a side event with women farmers from Tanzania and Kenya and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And these are farmers that are working hard to just maintain their way of life, and they were sharing their stories. And one woman at the end of her talk said something that stuck with me so much. She said that in the global north, which is where we are in Maine, we talk about lifestyle change. So how can we save energy? How can we drive less? How can we adapt to these things and do less, or but in the global south, they talk about how to survive. They talk about how to survive. And that was something that stuck with me so much as someone who comes from this privileged world where, yes, we will have so many problems here in Maine and already do with the climate crisis, but we're talking about lifestyle change, and that's change that we need to do. And so I guess to just wrap up, this is a problem that I've been interested in for my whole life, and something that I want to continue to work on and want to continue to work on within this lovely state of Maine. And something that has stuck with me from this international experience, and something that I hope to bring to this state, is really centering those voices of those who will be most affected and who are already most affected by the climate crisis, and those who are least responsible. Centering Indigenous voices, voices of people of color and poor communities, and those who we can't leave behind. Thank you.
We'll invite our presenters up here for a little bit of old-fashioned mic running Q&A. We still have those skills. Andy's warming up over here. Great. Do we have oh, and Sam, towing the line. Great. All right. Okay, first question over here.
I'm wondering if you'd speak about kelp aquaculture. Like, why would we want kelp? Is there any synergy with shellfish? And what do you think the future is?
We started with kelp because we had evidence to prove that it helped with the acidification of the water. And so we wanted to do something that would be environmentally beneficial to the lobster industry, which is the mainstay of Vinyl Haven. And we also wanted to try to demonstrate that we could have alternative fisheries that could coexist with the lobster industry. Kelp farming takes place primarily from November, when the seeding is done, through May. So it's an off-season type of industry. It's off-season from the lobster industry. And we wanted to try to encourage some of the fishermen to get involved in an alternative revenue stream.
Question?
So this is for Anna. Yeah, I heard you speak also at the Climate Council back at the end of January, and you mentioned it again today. What is climate justice? What do you mean by that term, climate justice?
Sure, yeah, that's a fantastic question. So climate justice is this idea that the climate crisis isn't just an environmental issue, but it's also an issue that touches all these other issues. So it affects social issues, it affects the economy, it affects, just as sort of we're talking within the Climate Council, it affects communities and buildings and all walks of life. And so the idea of climate justice is that we need to address the climate crisis as sort of an umbrella issue that isn't just environmental. Yeah.
Thanks to all of you. I wonder about when we talk about innovation and meeting the challenges we have, sometimes we think it's a technology, but I also think we need innovation in governance, and like whether that's adapting to storms or climate change, actually doing that in a way that's fast and not bureaucratic, but is people-centered. Do you have thoughts on that, or a way that you think that could happen? Like, I think when you talk about like the storm response, like coming in and changing the building codes, like, did that happen fast? Did someone just make it happen? Like, how can we do this faster? Because I think we have a little bit too much bureaucracy going on.
Was that to me?
Yes.
Oh, excuse me, I didn't get to the first part. Yeah, changing the building code, it takes a political willingness that without a preceding disaster is very often tough to motivate. But that's why I say that a disaster can be an inflection point, and it can let you move leaps and bounds ahead of what you would have done before. But if you were to take back to your community now that you think a change in the building code is a beneficial thing, I'd say start the discussion and talk about the fact that NOAA meteorologists can't predict these storm tracks anymore. You know all the spaghetti lines they always have on the Weather Channel that show you where the storms go. Last year they had one that came off of Africa, a hurricane, turned way before North America and went up and hit Britain. They've had them that have gone down and hit South America, that have gone straight across and hit Central America instead of following that highway that takes them through the Caribbean, takes them up into either the Gulf or the East Coast region. You can talk about a very real threat to the Maine waterfront communities from meteorological events that are not following the regular pattern. Was that to the point?
Other questions?
That was perfect. Hi. I want to thank you for sharing your stories, and also I was looking at the Island Institute logo and I was wondering about why the circles, because there's this beautiful poem around just how living life in widening circles, and it's a Rilke poem, and it kind of goes around, you know, am I Christine, or am I actually someone from Maine, or am I actually a bird, or am I actually the earth, and how we're all connected, and it made me wonder how, if at all, has your relationship to the land or to your surroundings, to the world, changed in the last couple of years or in particular points in time, and if you would care to share that.
Emily?
I think I've had a sense that we need to look beyond what we currently do in our community. We need to look for new opportunities. We need to encourage new leadership, which I spoke to in my presentation. I think that we need to be optimistic about the future, because I see new leaders emerging. I see new ways of doing things within my industry, the lobster industry. And I see more reception to the the aquaculture of the world. Back in the 80s, there was a lot of dissension and a lot of opposition as a lot of big salmon farms came in trying to carve out ocean floor, particularly in the off islands. Today, I see a lot more cooperation through education and through consensus building.
I would add, in Maine last year, we had a discussion with some of our panelists around the concept of Maine as vacation land in Maine, the way life should be. And I was really struck by the responses that folks gave us last year around that really being around a connection to land and a connection to place. And although some things have changed, that was sort of fiercely what Mainers is connected to the land. How that rallies us for these next challenges on the horizon, how we adapt and change, that's all, for discussion. But Miles, did you want to add anything to that from the VI perspective?
I would add on to what Christine said earlier. There is nothing that will change your life more than a life-changing event. And an extreme climate event is certainly one that can do that.
Yeah, great. Other questions? Bobby?
I'm not sure how your island gets its energy in St. John's, but solar would seem to be an opportunity. But I'm wondering how, if solar panels are available that can be tied down in a high wind, a very high wind.
Well, the first part of that is we get our electricity on St. John via submarine cable from St. Thomas, where they burn number 3 bunker oil, sadly. They're switching over to LNG to go a little bit greener. But yeah, I mean, solar is ideal for us. We have the highest per kilowatt cost of energy anywhere under the U.S. flag. At one point, it got up to 52 cents. You can see energy bills and rental villas in the thousands of dollars every month. Solar panels can repay themselves in an amazingly short period. I had 30 blow away on my home, replaced them with 20, and because they were 2008 when they were put in, and those 30 that took off in the storms, the 20 that have come in have given me more power and output. I still maintain, and I'm in real estate, my other hat is real estate, that it's the smartest investment you can make in your home. The public utility is publicly owned. It's I guess you'd call it a co-op or something along that model, but it's got some real challenges. So yeah, the microgrids, the standby generators, the solar fields, nobody designs to a Category 5 hurricane. Nobody designs buildings or solar panels or anything else to 185-mile-an-hour winds with tornadoes. So you're just going to have to accept that almost whatever you put in front of that storm is going to be gone. But that's a risk with solar panels, yes.
I would say electricity and energy in general is a place that we're focused on learning here on the coast of Maine. We have a number of islands paying extremely high electricity rates, and some of which don't even have connections to the mainland. And so that's one of the places where our networks and learning from the Caribbean, from Alaska, from other non-grid connected places to figure out how we can bring those technologies to work here on the coast of Maine is been a big force sort of driving our network building over the years. And I hope we've got friends online from that crew. Other questions? Kat?
Yeah, me. We've seen in the extreme events of life these days, we see leadership coming from a lot of different places. We're seeing it from children in places where we don't see it from adults and vice versa. And so I'm wondering, in your experiences, and I was wondering the same in Puerto Rico, like, what do you see, sort of generationally, what are your experiences of where leadership's coming from and the kind of ways it's showing up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, from my world, I see a lot of youth leadership, and I see a lot of energy and inspiration coming from youth. I work with almost 100 youth from all over the state of Maine on climate issues, but then there's also leadership coming from the state. There's also leadership coming from so many individuals across the state, and I think at least on climate change, on the issue that I'm really inspired by it. It's really becoming something that people are waking up to, and everybody is joining in, which is what you want ultimately. Yeah.
We see the same thing in Vinyl Haven with children now being in aquaculture projects, be involved in. We have obviously a lot of climate change discussions in Vinyl Haven, sea level rise, the whole infrastructure of Vinyl Haven could be compromised by sea level rise. So kids are getting involved and taking an active role in those discussions.
Ania, it's a little funny sometimes to use the word youth with you, right? You're not a child. You're an emerging leader, and we need emerging leaders in this space, particularly when it comes to climate. We need all hands on deck. You've got a room that I think for the most part is probably really wanting to back you right up and appreciates you being bold and courageous in this space, along with all of your peers that you're working with in college and beyond. I want to ask you to be really honest right now. We had the panel before,
Oh man.
wanting to be really honest. If everybody in this room could do something to support what you're working towards, what would that look like? What would you ask of us, the old grown-ups,
Oh, good question.
in the room to support your work?
I mean, part of it is just this, giving space for youth to share their voices. It's not just me, it's so many people from across the state I represent. Only one sort of bite of the chunk of the future generation, because we're the future of everyone, right? It's not just me. I think voting is so important. Just supporting youth however you can, whether it be supporting their campaigns or like I said, sharing their voices like this. But also, I think not putting it all on the youth. I think we all have a responsibility, and we all need to be working hard. And we can't just youth can be an inspiration and a reminder, but we also don't have the power or the skills to get it all done. So you guys have to do something too, I guess. That's what I'm saying.
Are there other things that you feel like your movement has struggled with in terms of older partners working in this space, things for us to be mindful of about what not to do?
I think the tokenization of youth has been something that's come up quite a bit. Not just using youth as sort of like a media outlet or just one voice, but to really give them space to share their stories and to be a part of the solution, or to be a part of whatever you're working on is so important. Yeah.
Great. I hope everybody listened carefully. I want to invite you to help me in thanking our presenters here. Thank you.